It is better that 10 guilty persons escape than that one innocent suffer. Sir William Blackstone, English jurist and justice. All right. Good morning and welcome to another episode of the Liberty Dad podcast, a discussion on politics and culture. If you're tuning in live, I want to especially thank you for giving me your time so early. I'm noticing some weirdness with the videos that are playing here. So let me know in the comments if there's something weird going on with the stream. I don't really know. It seems like there might be, but we will try to power through it and just do what we do. The show must absolutely go on as best as we can. But do let me know if there's any weird glitches happening. I noticed from the videos, it seemed like there was like some glitches and delays. All right. So what's going on today? We're going to talk about Dexter Taylor. And I've got a bunch of stuff queued up that I want to kind of go through and talk about. Now, the first thing I'm going to point out is that I don't have any guests on the show. Like there's quite a few shows out there that have either had Dexter himself on the show or they were talking about it. If you're not familiar with Jeff Charles, look him up on Twitter. He has covered this case extensively, and so I recommend that you can go there for all the details of his case. I kind of want to take a little bit of a different angle here. And hopefully it will add meaningful context to the story. So let me pull up the story just in case anybody is not familiar with what is in fact going on here with this. Let me pull this story up here. So here's a news story, and I'm just going to read it to you. Brooklyn man gets 10 years for arsenal of ghost guns, including rifles found at home. So this was just published like 2 days ago. A Brooklyn man, let me zoom in on this a little bit so that you can read it if you just happen to be taking a peek. All right, a Brooklyn man was sentenced to 10 years in prison after he was found to have an arsenal of more than a dozen ghost guns inside his apartment, according to the district attorney. Dexter Taylor was sentenced to spend a decade in prison on Monday after being convicted by a jury in April on a slew of firearms related charges. Brooklyn DA Eric Gonzalez said that the 53-year-old Taylor had ordered a number of ghost gun kits and parts from different online retailers and had them shipped to his home on Eldert Street in Bushwick. During a search of his apartment in April 2022, officers found four AR-15 style assault weapons, five handguns, four rifles, and more than 50 rounds of ammo in an unlocked safe and a closet. Now, I want to point out something very quickly here. 50 rounds is not a lot. Like, that'll get you about 5 minutes at a range. So 50 rounds, like more than 50 rounds, like that's not even a lot. Like, I don't even understand why they bothered. But gunpowder, shell casings, triggers, a 3D printer, and other parts used to build guns were also uncovered during the search, the DA said. So they found a lot of stuff. Now, keep in mind, the man is a hobbyist. This is what happens when you get into a hobby, you acquire a lot of stuff. According to the evidence presented during the trial, Taylor spent about $40,000 to get the ghost gun parts and tools. He did not have any gun license, officials said. Okay, so what? He spent a lot of money on stuff. A lot. How many men do you know have spent a lot of money on their hobby? Quite a few. Like if you're a woodworker and I enjoy woodworking. Uh, I'm starting to accrue a large amount of tools to that end. I enjoy working in my yard. I have spent a fair amount of money to buy tools for that end. That is how hobbies work. So just having a lot is not, or at least should not be a crime. Just having it, right? Because notice they didn't say anything on there about he was a criminal or that he has, that he had an intent to sell, which he explicitly said he not only does not in video interviews. He said, look, they took my computer, they took everything. They have all the evidence they need to know that I had no intent whatsoever to sell this stuff. I'm literally just a hobbyist and I'm doing this because I find it interesting. And yeah, I guess he had plans to maybe move to New Hampshire and maybe even start a business. Okay, I'm good with that. Nothing wrong there. Here's where it gets interesting. And this is what I'm going to kind of focus on a little bit. Ghost guns are a threat to New Yorkers everywhere. And my office is working tirelessly with our partners in law enforcement to stop their proliferation, said Gonzalez. Today's sentence should send a message to anyone who, like this defendant, would try to evade critically important background checks and registration requirements to manufacture and stockpile these dangerous weapons. Every ghost gun we take off the street is a win for public safety. Oh, is that so? How is it a win? I think what needs to happen is that people need to press. And we know the media is not going to do it. They don't do their job unless it's, unless their job is related to a character that they don't like, right? Then they do their job. But in a case like this, why aren't they asking and pressing and getting in there and saying, okay, how is this a win for public safety? Is the public being attacked relentlessly by ghost guns? Is that what's going on here? Are men who spend $40,000 on what they claim to be a hobby, which again, very common, are men that spend $40,000 who have a squeaky clean record, zero offense. Are those guys threats to society? Like, have we seen this rise of men who have went from having zero record to spending $40,000 on anything and they become a threat? Like, is that what's happening here? No, they tell you right here. I mean, Gonzalez, this fellow, what did he say he was? He was the DA. The DA Gonzalez. He said today's sentence should send a message to anyone like this defendant, who, like this defendant, would try to evade critically important background checks and registration requirements to manufacture and stockpile these dangerous weapons. He's going to jail for 10 years because he didn't sign. He basically, it's administrative. This is what it amounts to. Administrative, a background check and registration requirement. This is administrative stuff. It's not that he committed a crime. It's not that he assaulted somebody. It's not that he went and he sold these guns to gang members. Nope, none of that. He didn't fill out paperwork effectively. That's what he's going 10 years in jail because he didn't fill out paperwork. That's really what it amounts to at the end of the day. So, where are the riots for that? Why aren't it's a black man? Why aren't people rioting in the streets and saying, really? We're going to send an innocent black man to jail? And we say he's innocent. I know that the court convicted him. I'm going to say he's innocent. But we're going to send a black man to jail for lack of paperwork for 10 years in prison. 10 years. That's what we want to do. That's the message that we want to send. That's insane. We're going to talk about this a little bit more. We're going to get into that. But first, what I want to do is I want to pull up a clip from Colin Noir. He is a Second Amendment lawyer and gun rights activist and very intelligent guy. And he has a nice little clip that I found regarding this case. And you just got to listen to it. You really do. So let me play this video here of Colin Noir. And I might stop it from time to time just to add my own, but he pretty much covers it pretty well.
Waiting to be sentenced in the court of the same judge who, during the trial, told Taylor's attorney that the Second Amendment doesn't exist here. That judge is Abena Darka, or however you say her name. I'm just going to call her Abracadabra, since she thinks she can magically eliminate whole constitutional amendments. If you ask me, the person that needs...
Okay, so a little context here on what happened. So let me just kind of back up where that text is a little bit. So allegedly, now I really worked to find some sort of formal documentation. Now, when I say allegedly, I'm only saying that in the context that I could not find formal documentation, but his lawyer has come out and said, "Look, we were told not." And he said, "Do not bring the Second Amendment into this courtroom. It doesn't exist here." Let me see if I can get out of the way. She So you can't argue the Second Amendment. This is New York. So I don't know the full context to that. And don't get me wrong, folks. There is no context under which I would accept that. Zero. But I couldn't find any context so that I could make any more argument about this and say, okay, this is where I think, because it's like literally two sentences. Now, that two sentences is should be enough to make everybody angry, right? We should all be like, what? The Second Amendment? Like, okay, maybe the argument of the Second Amendment isn't a good one, right? Like let's assume that. And I am not a lawyer, so maybe there's some sort of principle here where the judge can say, "Hey, that's not a good argument. Find something else." That seems kind of weird to me, but maybe that happens. But it seems weird to me. Seems a problem that somebody could not use the Second Amendment when the entirety of the case is about guns. Like that's the whole point of the case. If there weren't an issue with guns, there would be no case. The man wouldn't be in court, and nobody would be having this conversation. So it's a little weird, and I say that in the most negative sense possible, right? Like it's a little weird that his attorney could not use the Second Amendment as an argument. Now, maybe it's a bad argument, right? Like maybe in this particular case, the Second Amendment wouldn't be applicable to help him out, right? Maybe it's a bad argument, but in my opinion, and again, this is not a legal opinion, he should be free to make that argument and say, "Hey, here's my argument. I think this is why I shouldn't be convicted." And then if that is the case, then he shouldn't be. Then his the jury shouldn't find him guilty. And then if it is the case, if he makes a good argument, then the jury should find him not guilty. Right? Like that's how it should go. But he should be free to make even a bad argument. But this is directly related to the case. So that's weird. Like, I'll give you an example of what I mean. This is not much, not this is not quite comparable, but it's the best real life example that I can think of. I know somebody whose father was an alcoholic or is an alcoholic, and he got pulled over by the police. And this was up in Indiana. He got pulled over by the police for driving drunk, and he went to court. And his argument, not gonna lie, his argument was the officer had no right to pull him over because he was only swerving within his lane. So he was still within the boundaries of his lane. Now that's a dumb argument. I mean, I heard that argument years ago. I was a young guy and I was like, well, that's a dumb argument. That doesn't even make sense. But he should feel free to be able to make it. Right. Same concept. Because like the argument was, like, hey, should I have been arrested? Okay. And should I even been pulled over? Were the circumstances such that the officer, like, that's fine. You can make that argument. In the same way here, which I think here is a much stronger argument, like significantly, he should be able to make the argument that, hey, the Second Amendment protects his right to do this. And the judge said, no, 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 you can't do that. So we should, because now we're convicting, and I keep pointing out a black man because we have seen riots over what has happened to black men. So if there's gonna like, why aren't people rioting now and saying, hey, we're sending a man to jail for 10 years, to prison, not jail. We're sending a man to prison for 10 years over documentation, over administrative issues. That he didn't actually commit any violent crime, nor was there any intent to commit a violent crime, nor was he aiding and abetting somebody else's violent crime. Nope, none of that. He just simply didn't register paperwork. He didn't put his name in a database so that the government could keep an even closer eye on him. All right, let's continue on with what Coley and Noir says.
who during the trial told Taylor's attorney that the Second Amendment doesn't exist here. That judge is Abina Darka, or however you say her name. I'm just going to call her Abracadabra since she thinks she can magically eliminate whole constitutional amendments. If you ask me, the person that needs to be in jail is the judge. Imagine a judge in a First Amendment case saying, don't bring the First Amendment into this courtroom. It doesn't exist here. People would lose their mind. Yet
they sure would, and rightfully so. If there's anything that we should cherish in terms of legal concepts, it absolutely has to be the Bill of Rights. It was designed specifically to ensure that citizens were not run roughshod by their own government. It was designed, like, I know a lot of people get angry about the Second Amendment and we're not having that argument today. But what we should do is we should be very angry. Even people who don't like the Second Amendment, they should be wise. I know they won't, but they should be wise enough to say, whoa, 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 you can make that argument, even if it's a bad argument, because it is a part of the founding of our country and what it means to be an American, that we have these rights and these are limitations on the government. So it's just, this is bonkers.
a judge says these exact words about the Second Amendment and no one says anything. What's truly pathetic and disheartening is that actual criminals in New York treat the legal system like a revolving door.
We're arresting the same people over and over again. We identified 716 people who are responsible for 30% of the shooting incidents last year. And frustratingly, we see many of them get arrested, released, arrested, released.
So,
all right, so let's pause that there for just a moment because I want to come back to this.
Waiting to be sentenced.
Give me a second. I apologize. Let's go back here. And I'm going to pause that for just a second. Okay, so we'll pause that for there. I'm going to bring up some more news articles here because I think this is very interesting. And let's see, where did it go here? So here in 2015, in September of 2015, so the officer that you saw, he was talking about this revolving door of criminals that are going in and out, in and out, in and out. And they're like seeing the same people over and over and over, right? And where am I? My goodness, I'm not even on the screen anymore. What in the world? Oh, I did the wrong one. How about that? There we go. There's me. Okay, so judge continues dad legacy of setting stunningly low bails. What's going on here? Well, in 2015, this was published in September of 2015 by the New York Post. And what's happening here is they're talking about how people are being let out who are accused of serious crimes. Like you might call them violent crimes, right? Crimes against somebody else, not administrative crimes, an actual violent crime. So if we scroll down, I'm not going to read the whole article, but I want to scroll down here because I found this. I thought this was interesting. So it says Manhattan civil justice Jeffrey Wright, 66, who fills in at a criminal court about once a year, was on the bench September 7th when two brothers busted with a cache of guns and drugs were arraigned. Now, just having guns and just having drugs doesn't necessarily make you a criminal. However, currently, the way that things work with the laws that we have, those two combinations kind of suggest you might be, okay? Because you might be a drug dealer who's operating under the in the black market, and things go haywire in the black market. Things get negative. So I would make the argument that the reason that a cache of guns and drugs would be potentially dangerous, or at least signal that somebody is dangerous, is because it's in the black market, not by virtue of just the guns and drugs themselves. Because right now, in the black market, you have to try to evade police and everybody's fighting for it. And there's not really any particular law and order as we understand it in our current society. So things operate a little differently, a little more violently. Eric Johnson, 48, went before Wright, while his brother Lance Johnson saw Judge Abina Abracadabra. We'll go with him. We'll go with what Colin Noir said. Although he had a lengthier rap sheet than his siblings. So now we're talking about two guys. So they had guns and they had drugs. And these two guys had rap sheets. So they are, and I don't know what the rap sheets were, but they already had a criminal history. This is not the same as Dexter Taylor, who has no criminal history, right? So now so let's paint this picture a little bit. These two guys, um, these two brothers had a rap sheet. They had guns and drugs, which currently, under our particular system of governance that allows black markets to flourish, and black markets have a lot of violence in them. This suggests that not only not only were they potentially dangerous, but they have been dangerous. So that wasn't even a suggestion. They had been dangerous on some level. So although he had a lengthier rap sheet than his sibling, Wright set bail at a paltry $500 for Eric, while Darka smacked Lance with a more standard $60,000 bond, court records show. So we have this history of judges who are setting relatively low bail, $500 at least for one brother, and then the other brother got 60,000 because he went to a different judge. Now, I believe, and I don't have the reference, but I believe that initially Dexter was given a $250,000 bond, $250,000, $250,000. Again, no criminal history, and he only had a bunch of guns that his claim was are only for his own personal hobby because he enjoys it and finds it interesting. That's it, right? And there's one of the videos where he's talking. He's like, "Look, I didn't try to hide anything. I bought them on my credit card. Like they were, and New York was watching him, so they've been monitoring these purchases, and they're like, hey, red flag here. This guy has a bunch of purchases on his credit card. So he made no attempt to hide it. So he did nothing that would suggest criminal behavior or criminal intent. I think that's important here. So let's look at another article here. This article, also from 2015, but a few months later, back in December. Again, Judge Darka, no bail plan, making it easier for accused felons to hit the streets. Interesting. So we go down here. There we go. All right. So in another case, accused burglar Nicholas Grievous, 54, was busted on August 6th and freed by Manhattan judge Edwina Richardson Mendelson on $7,500 bail, even though prosecutors asked for $100,000. While free, Grievous allegedly committed another burglary. Right. So these are people that are committing actual violent crimes against people or property. Right. And they're getting out on simple bail. In yet another case, a prosecutor asked for $30,000 bail for accused gunpoint robber, and I can't pronounce his name, Mr. R. 20, but Manhattan judge abracadabra let him go free. So he didn't even get bail. He just got to go free. And I tried to look up to see, like, hey, did he come back through the system? Did he do something? We don't really know. I couldn't find anything on Mr. R. So there's a history of judges in New York letting people go or giving them substantially low bonds, bail bonds for violent crimes that they are accused of. Now, I get it. If you're accused of a crime, you are only accused. You are innocent until proven guilty. The point that I am making here is not that you would, treat somebody necessarily different because of the crime, but kind of, sort of. Because if you think about it, we find a guy that has no criminal record, and maybe he's making a whole bunch of guns, and we say, well, wait a minute, you're supposed to be registering and you're supposed to be doing all this. At least that's the claim, right? And so then they go and they say, well, okay, let's put bond out on you, and they put like a really high bond, and then he ends up getting convicted, and then he goes to prison for 10 years, which is what happened. And then we read these stories, long-standing stories from years ago, where there was literally a program designed, and you can look this information up. I don't have it all ready to show you at the moment, but there were programs designed intentionally to limit the number of people that were going to Rikers. And that program somehow allowed people who were accused of violent crimes to get back out on the street a little bit easier. And in some cases, commit more violent crimes. New York has a problem. They have a crime problem, like a real crime problem, and they seem to have a judge problem. They seem to have judges that cannot make good decisions. Because if you're making it easier for people who are criminals, or I'm sorry, accused of committing crimes, but violent crimes, if you're making it easier for them to go free than you are for people who are accused of what you might consider to be an administrative crime. Because again, he hasn't, Dexter has not committed any violent crimes, nor is there any hint of a violent crime of any kind. It is literally administrative. They're complaining because he didn't register and he's not on a database so that they can watch him even more closely. Although, since they seem to have all the information that they needed about him, why did they need him to be in a database? They're clearly watching him anyway. They've already got their police state fully functioning. Their Orwellian police state is in full force because they were able to find him because the man was doing everything above board. He bought his stuff with his credit card. He didn't try to hide it. He didn't go through some elaborate scheme to hide his transactions. He just said, okay, well, this is legal. I'm going to do it. It's a nice little hobby. I'll have fun. Let me go and buy this stuff. So he spends $40,000, presumably all through his credit card, and he's doing his thing, and he's not trying to sell them. He just, in fact, there was a video where he said he hadn't even shot him. He was just making them. So like, it's not even clear that they work. I assume they probably do, but it's not even clear that they work because he hasn't even shot them. All right, let's continue back with Colin Noir. And let's see here. Let's pick that back up.
Frustratingly, we see many of them get arrested, released, arrested, released.
So Lil Junebug can go out and shoot at his ops and then be back on the streets the next day. But when a 52-year-old software engineer makes guns in his home from legal parts as a hobby, they try to throw him in jail for 10 to 18 years. What's crazy is that on a federal level, making your own gun is legal. People have been making their own guns for hundreds of years. The Gun Control Act of 1968 allows an unlicensed individual, a regular civilian that doesn't hold a federal firearms license or FFL, to make a non-NFA firearm for personal use, but not for sale or distribution. Taylor was not selling these guns. For crying out loud, he never even shot them. But when Lil AstroTurf goes and actually shoots someone, they treat him like a fucking folk hero. Hell, they do it on social media. If my black ass makes a video about responsible gun ownership, I get shadow banned. But a group of underage kids waving around Glocks with switches on it, talking about shooting at their ops, viral. And then we wonder why there's so much violence in certain communities. You glorify the shit and vilify responsible gun owners. You have more contempt for legal gun owners who are contributing members to society than you do degenerates actually killing people. What kind of message do you think that sends to young people? Be a law-abiding, productive member of society and go to jail, or be a degenerate up and walk the streets with immunity. This is why I say gun control is not about saving lives, it's about control. They need the chaos of violence to justify their continued push for gun control because they can't sell you gun control if there is no gun violence. So they passively, if not actively, facilitate the gun violence in certain areas, then use those stats to scare suburban housewives into voting for more gun control, and then make an example out of any law-abiding gun owner who dare assert their rights under the Second Amendment, which is why this judge had the unmitigated gall to fix her mouth to say, do not bring the Second Amendment into this courtroom. It doesn't exist here. Like, what the f***? That is the language of a tyrant, not a judge. Saying shit like that should have you tried for treason. But that is where we are in this country, a country where a judge in a state can unilaterally eliminate a constitutional right. Thankfully, we have a legal system where you can appeal your case to higher courts and overturn unconstitutional decisions. But doing this isn't cheap, which is why I put a link to Dextor Taylor's 2A legal fund in the description section of this video. Now, keep in mind, this isn't just about Dextor Taylor. This is about all of our rights under the Second Amendment, because if this case can get to the Supreme Court, not only will this overturn Taylor's conviction, it will set a new legal precedent, thus making it extremely hard for states like New York and judges like Abracadabra, or whatever her name is, from prosecuting law-abiding citizens for exercising their constitutional right.
All right. It's really hard to top that, isn't it? I mean, that was wonderfully said. I mean, that man was just on it. That was fire. Goodness. I feel like I just want to stop the show and be like, well, there's not much more to add to that. but there is actually. Let's go and I mean, I'm not going to be able to top it, but there is more to add. And I agree with him 100%. Look, at the end of the day, I don't care that my neighbor might be manufacturing firearms, especially if my neighbor has shown zero initiative to be a violent criminal. And I keep saying that because in the libertarian community, if you're not familiar with the libertarian community, we distinguish between the two types of crimes. One's where there's a victim, one where there is no victim. And as I'll put this up on the screen here, Keith Garrett says, who was the victim? The victim here was the state of New York. That's not really a victim, but that's who that is really who the victim ultimately ends up being in this particular case. And they're only a victim because they're like, well, you didn't do the right paperwork. You didn't you, Dexter Taylor, you didn't do the administrative lift that you should have so that we could have denied you, which is really what it amounts to. It only that's the reason why, and we're gonna get to that in just a minute. The reason that they wanted this is so that they could deny it. Because when they deny it, then he can't pay for it, then he can't have it, and they get to have control, as Colian said. He said it's about control because it's not really about protecting people. If it was about protecting people, what we would do is we would encourage law-abiding citizens to do their thing, have a firearm, make their own firearms, and continue to be law-abiding citizens. And we would come down harsh on people who actually are committing crimes, violence against other people, where there is an actual, real flesh and blood victim. The state of New York is not, or in reality, should not be a victim because they're not. If I don't fill out my paperwork, like, okay, maybe you can consider it a fine or something silly like that, though I would argue otherwise. Like, we need to what we need in this society is to revamp our thinking because we are slowly and steadily creating more criminals through administrative faux pas than we are dealing with actual real criminals. We're flipping things upside down. We're making people who, under no circumstance, should be considered a criminal into criminals and kind of ignoring the real criminals. Or we're doing things that don't really stop those kind of people, the real criminals, people that are committing crimes against others. So let's get into that. Let me pull something up here. Let's see, where is my, let's go here. I think this is where I want it to go. All right. So let me pull some news back up here. So we're going to talk about this. So here's an article. This is from July of last year, and this is kind of talking about that same case. NYPD granting fewer gun permits after Supreme Court ruled it had to grant more, data shows. That's interesting. And then the byline here, the subline is a ghost gun hobbyist who's fighting charges after building an arsenal in his apartment is hoping the data could help overturn some of the city's remaining restrictions on gun possession. All right, let's zoom this in a little bit more so we can see it better. All right. The NYPD approved fewer new licenses to people requesting permits to carry or keep firearms in their homes or businesses in 2022 than the year prior, data obtained by the city shows. Despite the 2022 U.S. Supreme Court ruling that found a key provision of the state's long-standing gun control violated the Second Amendment right to bear arms. This is why I said at the very beginning, New York has a problem. They like, let's think about this for a minute. We just watched that little clip of the officer saying, hey, we're seeing people like a revolving door, violent criminals. Good morning there, Mr. Producer. We're also seeing where judges have made it a little bit easier for people who are accused of violent crimes and have rap sheets behind them to suggest that the violent crime that they're accused of might actually be legitimate. We're seeing where judges are making it easier for them to get back out on the streets, and that some of these people, while they're out on the streets, commit or are accused of committing yet another crime while they're waiting for the government to deal with the first accusation. So we're seeing these problems. Crime is going up. At least that's the feel, right? I haven't looked at the actual data, but let's keep, there's crime out there. And what does what does New York PD do? They grant fewer licenses. So you have people, now we know this is how it works. Criminals aren't asking to get a license. People, when I say criminal, I mean people that are committing violent crimes or that would be willing to commit violent crimes based on their history. Those people are not asking for permission. But the people who might ask for permission because they're law abiding and they just want to feel protected or they want to be protected, no, those people, they're not getting them. In 2021, the NYPD, which vets firearm permits, received 4,663 applications and approved 2,591 of them, about 56%, all under the stricter proper cause standard the Supreme Court struck down last year. That standard required gun owners in New York to show proper cause in order to receive a permit to carry a weapon. But the court said licenses should be granted by default unless there was a specific reason to deny an applicant. That is 100% how our Constitution reads and should be understood. That people, because I get it, like we do put some limitations on people, but it requires due process, which means you get it by default unless there's a reason that you can't otherwise have it. In other words, you need due process. We need to come and say, oh, you can't have this because last year you shot up a school or something, right? Whatever. In 2022, the NYPD saw an increased number of new applications. Now, let me ask you, 7,260, but let me ask you something. Why? Why would NYPD see an increased number of new applications? Is it because criminals are all of a sudden like, man, let's go and sign up and get our names in the database so that the government can watch us? We think that's what's going on? No. Citizens are recognizing that they're not safe. So they're like, you know what? Maybe I do need a firearm. But they approved just 1,550 or 21%, even though applications filed in the second half of that year no longer had to meet proper cause, the proper cause standard, where applicants had to make affirmative case for why they needed a license. So what are they saying here? Number one, in 2021, they approved 2,591 permits. But in the year following, after New York was told by the Supreme Court, you need to do more, they actually did less, 1,550, even though roughly 40 some percent, no, that's not 40, probably about 50% increase roughly. Trying to do math on live on the air, don't do that. But 7,260 applications were submitted compared to 4,663 the year prior. So New York is causing people to be less safe, and they're ignoring the Supreme Court. Like, why have a Supreme Court, I guess, if they're not even going to follow it? In the 6 months after the High Court's ruling in New York State Rifle versus Bruin from June 2022 to December 2022, the NYPD saw a surge in new gun permit applications from just over 2,000 in the same period a year earlier to nearly 5,000. So far, the department has approved 503 of those, or just 10%, despite its guidelines and state law requiring applications to be decided upon within 6 months. Relatively few applications have been flat out denied, just 16 in 2022, including 2 for applications submitted after the June 23rd Supreme Court ruling, meaning the approval rates still could change as NYPD completes additional and now overdue investigations. Most of the applications are still pending, an indication of NYPD's permitting operation came to a standstill in the wake of the new ruling. So, in other words, they're dragging their feet. Your constitutional right, New Yorkers, is being held up because NYPD is dragging their feet. Let's see here. Attorney Vinu Varghese obtained the data from the NYPD through a Freedom of Information law request on behalf of his client, Dextor Taylor, a 52-year-old software engineer facing gun charges for allegedly amassing and quote, arsenal of homemade ghost guns, per the Brooklyn District Attorney's Office, which declined to comment on the ongoing case. Varghese is just seeking to get the charges against Taylor dismissed, arguing in court papers submitted last month that there was no way Taylor could have gotten a permit to keep guns in his home legally. That's because of what he argues is the NYPD's molasses-like, corruption-prone permitting process, which he says violated Taylor's constitutional right to bear arms. So New York is dragging their feet on people's constitutional right, what was determined by the Supreme Court. Now, let me remind liberals out there, a lot of you love when it was in your favor. A lot of y'all love to say, well, Supreme Court ruled, so that's the law of the land. That's the way it goes. Well, I tell you what, how about now? The Supreme Court ruled. It's the damn law of the land. End of story. Period. And it's a constitutional right, one that we can look back through history and we can see that it was enjoyed just like this. This is exactly how it was enjoyed. I don't care whether you like it or not. All the, what did he call them? The housewives that get scared into submission. I don't care, moms demand, what you think of it. You're being scared into submission and it's totally working. You need to get back to the box wine and leave everybody alone. But the truth is, this is how that the Second Amendment, exactly what Dexter Taylor was doing, is exactly how people enjoyed their Second Amendment for over 200 years in this country. That's how, exactly like this. And he is the exact kind of person that should be uninhibited, and it shouldn't be a problem. All right, let's continue on. I got a couple more articles here. All right, so let's see here. After Bruin, New York lawmakers plan to go right up to the line to restrict gun access, but do their proposals cross it? From sweeping definitions on what counts as sensitive location, well, that's interesting, to new licensing requirements. Albany plans to test the Supreme Court's recent decision. Some Second Amendment experts are skeptical. So now, this was back in June of 2022 that they were talking about. New York lawmakers are like, okay, we see they're talking to, they're basically talking to the Supreme Court. They're like, all right, we see your ruling. We're going to raise you this new legislation. They won't quit. They are trying to skirt around it. In fact, I will say this. New York lawmakers are making more of an effort to skirt around what ought be considered, hands down, the Second Amendment right to own firearms. They're skirting around it more than Dexter Taylor did to actually just exercise his right. He was being more honest than they were. They were putting more effort into trying to get around what ought be considered plain and simple, your constitutional right. They were putting more effort to get around that than Dexter Taylor was, because he bought him with his credit card. He had no problem. He's like, oh, yes, it's my right. I'll buy them with my credit card. I'm going to make it at home. I'm not going to sell them. His social media doesn't make any hint of it. He's a law-abiding person. He's not committed a single crime ever. He's got a squeaky clean record is the way that they describe it. And he's not even shot them. He's literally, it's his hobby. There are coin collectors and there are other people that collect other things. There's woodworkers. I enjoy woodworking myself. There are people that enjoy doing all kind of different things. This is a hobby for him. Now, maybe his hobby would have grown into something where he produced them in mass. And then at that point, then according to the law, he would need to go out and follow the appropriate administrative rules. But, which I would disagree with, but he wasn't trying to sell these at this point. So he didn't need to follow those rules because he wasn't trying to do any of that. He was simply like, let me just make these. Let me just produce them. And speaking of, by the way, this whole arsenal, that's an abusive language. Like, if you're not even shooting them and you're not even sure they work, just making a bunch of stuff doesn't necessarily make it an arsenal. An arsenal, like, I mean, I get it. We can argue and say, well, if you just have a stockpile, if you had a lot of them, then it's totally an arsenal. But what do people do with an arsenal? They keep it on hand on purpose. But even still, there should be nothing wrong with having an arsenal or many guns. Some people have one or two guns. Some people have, thousands and thousands of dollars of guns. Fine. I'm cool with it. Either way. Let's continue on. Oh, look, there's a tyrant. Responding to the U.S. Supreme Court's landmark rejection of New York's restrictive gun carry permit laws, New York's political leadership has begun crafting a new law designed to limit where guns can be carried in public as a workaround to the High Court's decision. So they didn't like the High Court's decision, so they're like, we're just going to figure out how to work around it. But will the proposals withstand expected litigation from gun rights groups? Last week, the court, by a 6-3 vote, declared New York's requirement that gun owners must show proper cause to obtain a permit violates both the Second Amendment's right to keep and bear arms and the 14th Amendment due process clause. So, not just one amendment, two it violated. On Wednesday, Governor Kathy Hochul spelled out some details of the legislation Albany hopes to pass during a special session Thursday aimed at keeping as many restrictions to public carry in place without running afoul of the court's ruling. So again, they're doing more to limit citizens from their rights than Mr. Taylor was to try to exercise his right. They're putting more effort into skating around the laws that they were told exist than he was. Yet he's the one that's in trouble. He's the one going to prison for 10 years. The final legislation will include tightened requirements for obtaining a permit and declare specified, quote, sensitive locations, end quote, to be gun-free zones. So basically what they're trying to do now is increase the number of places that can experience a mass shooting. Because as we all know, the favorite place of mass shooters to go out and shoot people are gun-free zones or sensitive locations. But if Albany defines what sensitive location too broadly, the state of New York could find itself back in court. So while the state of New York is playing games with people's rights and the Supreme Court is telling them, no, that's a violation. No, a violation, right? While they're doing that, otherwise innocent people are going to prison. It's a miscarriage of justice. All right, what is a sensitive location? Both Adams and James address the question of sensitive locations, admitting that new gun regulations must be carefully designed to withstand legal challenges. For example, City Council Speaker Adrian Adams last week called on Albany to draft legislation that would effectively declare most of the 5 boroughs gun-free. At his press conference Wednesday, Adams admitted this was wishful thinking. My definition of sensitive location is a sensitive city, the entire city of New York, he said. The Supreme Court said we can't do that. So I think that a clear definition of what it looks like is going to fall with my law department. Okay. In the majority decision, Justice Thomas acknowledged the legality of sensitive places, but made clear that there were limits, singling out Manhattan as an example. There is no historical basis for New York to effectively declare the island of Manhattan a sensitive place simply because it is crowded and protected generally by the New York City Police Department, he wrote. Hochul, fresh off her decisive primary victory Tuesday, said during a press conference that the state intends to limit the number of people walking the streets with concealed firearms, but only in a way that will withstand legal attacks. So listen to that. Let me repeat that one more time because this is crazy. This is what she said that during a press conference. The state intends to limit the number of people walking streets with concealed firearms, but only in a way that will withstand legal attacks. They care more about the law being protected against legal attacks than innocent citizens being protected against legal attacks. Because who makes a legal attack? Law-abiding citizens, people that haven't committed an actual crime. Right? If I'm carrying my concealed firearm, if I'm carrying a firearm, I'm concealing it, and I'm just walking to the store, and I'm otherwise not in any way attempting to use that firearm, attempting to brandish it, to scare people, any of that stuff, then I am using it as intended. And like I live in Florida, but so if the state of Florida were to say, well, no, you can't do that, and they made up some reason. And then I went and I challenged it in court. And I said, no, I have the right to do this. They're wrong. Then what I'm doing is I'm showing that I am not a threat to other people. Criminals who would use their concealed carry in a way that would threaten other people are not the ones making legal attacks. It is the people who are law abiding. They are more worried. The state of New York is more worried about keeping their laws out of reach of being they're more worried about defending their laws against law-abiding citizens than they are ensuring that law-abiding citizens can walk down the street. And we just watched, I don't know how many videos on social media of a woman walking. All of a sudden, some guy just rolls up and just punches her and knocks her out. And we saw like there was like a whole rash of videos like that. It was insane. So these people now, these law-abiding citizens can't conceal carry because the New York wants to make it harder because it's a sensitive place, so sensitive that they're busy focusing on protecting themselves against legal challenges rather than saying, what the hell are we going to do about men punching women? Why don't we solve that problem? Why don't we stop? Why don't we figure out how to solve the murder problem? All right, let's last article here. So this one from Thomas Sowell. This was written also in 2015. Everything is in 2015. You seeing a trend here? We've had this almost 10 years ago, 2024 now. 10 years ago, we've been talking about, hey, there's violent crime, and we're more worried about dealing with legal challenges than we are protecting people. Okay, well let's see what Thomas Sowell had to say in his article titled "The Gun Control Farce Part 2." The grand illusion of zealots for laws preventing ordinary law-abiding people from having guns is that gun control laws actually control guns. In a country with many millions of guns, not all of them registered, this is a fantasy and a farce. Guns do not vanish into thin air because there are gun control laws. Guns, whether legal or illegal, can last for centuries. Passing laws against guns may enable zealots to feel good about themselves, but at the cost of other people's lives. Why anyone would think that criminals who disobey other laws, including laws against murder, would obey gun control laws is a mystery. A disarmed population makes crime a safer occupation and street violence a safer sport. Now, this was written in 2015, and he called street violence a safer sport. What might you call men walking around and just randomly punching women? I would call that a safer sport of violence, a street violence, being a sport. They're doing it for sport. Why? Because there's no consequence. Because they don't have to worry about a woman on the ground pulling a gun out of her purse and blasting his head off. When you have to worry about those consequences, you think twice before who you punch randomly for no good reason. And it's making crime a safer occupation because, again, as he points out, criminals they're already breaking laws. The knockout game of 2015, the knockout game of suddenly throwing a punch to the head of some unsuspecting passerby would not nearly be so much fun for street hoodlums if there was a serious risk that the passerby was carrying a concealed firearm. Weird, I just said that. He said that in 2015. We're still having the problem. New York PD has not resolved the problem of people getting randomly punched in their own streets, but here they are worried about, well, let's make it a sensitive place. Let's make this a gun-free zone. Why we should do that? We need to put our energy toward making sure that that our laws withstand legal challenges from people who just want to be safe, who want to protect themselves as they're walking down the street, whether it's to go to work or go pick up a coffee from Starbucks. Being knocked out in a boxing ring means landing on the canvas, but being knocked out on the street usually means landing on concrete. Victims of the knockout game have ended up in the hospital or in the morgue. In other words, just a simple punch, which, made to some of these online badasses who I assure you are not, but that could end up taking your life. A simple punch out on the street. You could end up dying from a punch, especially one that you're not suspecting. But if you don't die, New York is making sure that you can't shoot the person who literally just threatened your life, potentially could have ended your life. New York is like, yeah, you shouldn't be able to carry. You shouldn't be able to make sure that that person thinks twice before swinging upon you. This was in 2015 again. Remember 2015? I read the articles about they made a concentrated effort to reduce the number of people being sent to Rikers, and so judges in 2015 were like, well, maybe this person can be let go, or maybe we'll just put a pretty low bond, and this person can go free, even though they have a rap sheet and they've been convicted, or not convicted, they've been accused of committing another violent crime. No, 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 we shouldn't deal with that and say maybe that's the kind of person we want to put into Rikers just in case, right? I get it. You're innocent until proven guilty. But if you've got a rap sheet and you're accused of a violent crime, you shouldn't be able to necessarily get out easier than somebody who has no criminal record and hasn't been convicted of a violent crime and and is likely just simply exercising their right. If instead, going back to the article, if instead just a few of those who played this sick game ended up being shot, that would take a lot of the fun out of it for others who are tempted to play the same game. Even in places where law abiding citizens are allowed to own guns, they are seldom allowed to carry concealed weapons, even though concealed weapons protect not only those who carry them, but also protect those who do not. For the hoodlums and criminals have no way of knowing in advance who is armed and who is not. That is the beauty of concealed carry. When I go to Target, per se, I don't know who's carrying. So let's say that I'm a would-be criminal. I'm eyeballing who I want to follow to the car and maybe attack. Maybe it's a woman with a child. I don't know if she has a firearm in her purse. I don't know if the big burly guy has a firearm in his back somewhere, right? And so the only way what's going to happen when if I assume that nobody's carrying a firearm or that there's very few, then I make my choices based on who I can physically overpower. So what do laws like this do? The big burly guy, like the 6'5" guy that weighs 250 pounds, looks like he works construction all day and could pick me up and toss me. I'm probably going to leave him alone. I'm probably going to go after who? The woman or the small guy, the small podcast guy who runs his mouth on, every morning, Monday through Friday. Yeah, but I'm going to go after the small person, the person that looks like somebody that I can physically overpower. We are endangering our women and children by this, rather than saying to criminals, you never know, that small frame woman who you might actually be able to overpower physically, she might have a gun and she might shoot you for trying. No, we take that away. All right, let's continue. Another feature of gun control zealotry is that sweeping assumptions are made and enacted into law on the basis of sheer ignorance. People who know nothing about guns and have never fired a shot in their lives, much less lived in high crime areas, blithely say things such as, nobody needs a 30-shot magazine. It's not a magazine. Anyway. No, it's clip. That's the word I was thinking. I was thinking he said clip. And I was like, no. Anyway, really, if 3 criminals invade your home, endangering the lives of you and your loved ones, are you such a sharpshooter that you could take them all out with a clip holding? Okay, there's where he says clip, holding 10 bullets, or a clip with just 7 bullets, which is the limit you should be allowed under laws in some places. Now, I want to point out in what was it? 2004, and I don't have it readily available. There was an article written in the New York Times that was talking about the New York Police Department and how often they fired and how often they hit their target. And the article stated that New York police officers who are supposedly trained to deal with criminals, right? They hit their target 34% of the time. It was actually higher if the target was a dog, but they hit their target 34% of the time. That means out of 10 rounds, 3.4 of them would potentially hit their target. Of course, this was an average, so some would be higher, some would be lower. 3.4, which means if you don't in my opinion, what that means is if you are supposedly a trained officer who's out there walking the beat, ready to deal with the criminal. Because remember, police tell us all the time. They love telling us, oh, my job is so dangerous. Okay, well, it's so dangerous. I guess you're prepared at any moment. And police officers in New York, where there's a lot of crime, they seem to be prepared and they're only able to hit the target 34% of the time. What do you think the percentage of time is going to be for a small woman who's walking with her child and has to suddenly grab her firearm because out of nowhere an attacker comes out, right? She's probably going to have less than 34%, which means she needs more than 10 rounds just to be sure so that she can hit her target and destroy him for trying to attack her. But no, no, no. We want to make sure we're keeping it. We want to make sure we keep the laws safe. That's what New York cares about. They care about keeping laws safe, not people, laws. I want to protect the laws against a legal challenge, not innocent men and men and women and children from criminal challenges. No, no, legal challenges. That's their focus. That's Governor Hochul's focus. Let's see here. Do you think that someone who is prepared to use a 30-shot magazine for criminal purposes is going to be deterred by a gun control law? All the wonderful sounding safeguards in such laws restrict the victims of criminals rather than the criminals themselves. This is why laws cost lives instead of saving lives. Are there dangers in widespread availability of guns? Yes. And one innocent death is one too many. But what makes anyone think that there are no innocent lives lost by disarming law-abiding people while criminals remain armed? Moms Demand doesn't want to answer that. I challenged a local Moms Demand activist to a debate, and she flipped out, and she was like, "Let's take this conversation to direct message, privately." And as soon as we did, "Oh, I'm so concerned about my safety," and I was like, "What are you talking about? It's a public debate, and you're out there all the time, yip yapping your mouth about guns, and you're all over the media and you're all over the news. You get attention whenever you want, and then all of a sudden somebody challenges you to debate, and now all of a sudden you don't want to. No, it's because they don't want to have to answer questions like that. They don't want to answer, what about the innocent lives that are lost by disarming law-abiding people while the criminals remain armed? They don't want to answer those kind of questions. So they just keep to the safety of their groups and chanting all their whatever they say, getting all the media when it suits them, but never having to answer really tough questions. If we're going to be serious, as distinguished from being political, we need to look at hard evidence instead of charging ahead on the basis of rhetoric. Sweeping assumptions need to be checked against facts, but that is seldom what gun control zealots do. Some gun control zealots may cherry pick statistics comparing nations with and without strong gun control laws, but cherry picking is very different from using statistics to actually test a belief. Among the cherry pick statistics is that England has stronger gun control laws than the United States and much lower murder rates. But Mexico, Brazil, and Russia all have stronger gun control laws than the United States and much higher murder rates. A closer look at the I had that A closer look at the history of gun laws in England tells a very different story than what you get from cherry pick statistics. The murder rate in New York over the past 2 centuries has been some multiple of the murder rate in London. And for most of that time, neither city had strong restrictions on the ownership of guns. Huh. Imagine that. New York had multiple had the murder rate had a higher murder rate than London by multiples over 2 centuries, while neither had strong restrictions on what could that be? What could that Beginning in 1911, New York had stronger restrictions on gun ownership than London had, and New York still had murder rates that were in multiple of murder rates in London. It was not the laws that made the difference in murder rates, it was the people. That is also true within the United States. But are gun control zealots interested in truth or political victory? Or perhaps just moral preening? This was written in 2015. The those in the people in power in New York, they're morally preening and they're more worried about political victories. They don't give a damn about the people because if they did, they wouldn't be trying to pass these laws. They wouldn't be trying to subvert the Supreme Court decision with sensitive places and other things that could withstand legal challenges. They would deal with crime, the same kind of crime that we see today in 2024 that was reported on, the same kind back in 2015. Yet instead, they're more worried about sending a 52-year-old man whose hobby was building guns with no criminal record, who did everything out in the open, made no attempt to try to hide it. They're more worried about sending him to jail than they are the people that would threaten the lives and the physical well-being of citizens in New York. As far as I'm concerned, New York is a failed state. And New Yorkers, they need to summon some of that New York tenacity. They need to rise up and need to throw these tyrants out of office or whatever authoritative position they're in. If it's a police chief who's championing this, get him out. I don't know what your laws are to do that. Get him out. Have him removed. If it's a DA, get him out. A city council member, remove them. Governor, toss him out. Physically, if you have to at this point, because if you don't, you may find yourself at the hands of a criminal and unable to defend yourself, hoping that NYPD will show up in time before your loved ones have to show up at your funeral. All right, folks, that is my show for today. I hope you found it informative and inspiring. Be sure to catch me Monday through Friday, 7 a.m. Eastern, for an informed discussion on politics and culture. Make sure you are subscribed to my YouTube channel, or if you prefer my Rumble channel, you can go to youtube.libertydad.com, or you can go to rumble.libertydad.com. While you're there, please leave me a comment. Let me know how I'm doing. Last but not least, I want you to remember, if you're a champion of liberty, your business is people and your product is liberty. I want you to have a great week. Catch you next time. But for now,